We talk about body maps and neuroplasticity and how all of us, every single person, no matter who they are, has some parts of their body that are more familiar and other parts that are less familiar. Like everyone today struggled with the hip. Lots of people today struggle with the hip thing. Okay, that's a less familiar area. And then because of neuroplasticity, we can change that. So we can make areas that are less familiar, we can make them more familiar. And there's essentially seems no limit to how that much can be done. The limit's just that if you spend more time getting familiar with this area at the expense of other areas, then you'll become less familiar with them. You know, neuroplasticity works both ways. You can increase your awareness of one area, but if all the time you're spending developing one area, you're not spending developing something else, and so that area will degenerate. Hence the homuncular refreshment idea. So every day you refresh at least a little bit your whole map, you know. So that much is clear to everyone, right? This morning's whole practice was more of that, yeah, where you find the parts that aren't so well developed and you develop them if you want to. So some cool stuff that is associated with that, which is also sort of hit the scene in the last 20 years or so, is the neuroscience of empathy research. And there's different kinds of empathy, but one of the more interesting and sort of newly developed understandings is what some people call kinesthetic empathy, which has to do with these things called mirror neurons. Has anyone not heard of mirror neurons? Haven't heard of mirror neurons? So mirror neurons, they aren't as simple as at first they thought they were, but they were discovered from horrible monkey experiments as usual, where they were measuring activity in the cerebral cortex of some experimental, probably macaques or whatever they usually use, and they were working out, you know, the activity when they reached for stuff and grasped it and brought it to their mouth. And then when the researcher was in the room and the researcher had some sort of food for themselves, and they reached for their food and put it in their mouth, and the same areas of the monkey's cortex lit up as if the monkey was doing it. So the monkey observed the researcher doing it, and the monkey's cortex lit up in the same way as if it was performing that action, but it wasn't. And they were like, oh, that's interesting, and so more research, and they discovered that, like, yeah, this is a thing in humans and in primates and in various other animals, especially social animals who live in social groups, where in their cortex, and largely in those body maps that we were talking about yesterday, there are these mirror neurons which mirror the activity, their mirror observed activity. So if, you know, like I look at Dane squatting like that, and in my body maps, a certain percentage of the neurons in my body maps fire as if it's me doing what he's doing, to give me an impression of how it must feel to be him, right? So when I scratch myself like this, in all of you guys' body maps, part of you is going like hand scratching face. If you've got a moustache, it's going hand scratching itchy moustache. And this is, you know, the theory is this has evolved because we're social primates. We've been social primates living in a social group for a long time, and so it benefits us to have an idea of what our peers are up to. So at first they thought it was just as simple as that, where, okay, you see me reaching like this and your right arm maps fire as if you're reaching like that. Later they found out that no, it's not that simple, and there's some mirror neurons fire specifically when people are reaching and bringing objects to the mouth. So there's ones that are specifically sensitive to food-related activity, others that are more specifically related to mating activity, others that are more specifically related to threat and danger, right? Or pain. So pain's a classic one, you know what I mean? Someone hurts themselves and we all wince, we all cringe, right?
And
Yawning's an interesting one. Yep. So kinesthetic empathy, where we literally feel in our bodies a sort of sub-threshold impression of what it must feel like to be that body or that body, right? And then because of our particular neurological ways of recognizing objects, we even get empathy for cartoons or empathy for it crosses the senses as well. It's cross-modal. Like you read about someone stubbing their toe and toe activity happens in your cortex as if it's you stubbing your toe, just a little bit, right? So V.S. Ramachandran, who's this neuroscientist, who was one of the guys who, I don't know if he was involved in discovering them, but he was definitely one of the main people involved in popularizing them. In his TED talk, talks about how if you anesthetize someone's left arm, for example, so that they're not actually receiving any sensation from their own left arm, and then you show them someone else's left arm being stroked, that the illusion's actually so convincing that they genuinely feel like it's their arm being stroked. Whereas if your left arm's not anesthetized, then you're getting all this sensation from your own left arm, like ambient noise kind of thing, and you see the other person's left arm being stroked and you sort of feel it a bit, but you anesthetize your own so you're not getting any signal from that, then that gets more signal, more mirror, or the mirror neuron activity isn't interfered with. So you guys following?
Yep.
If you're anesthetized, then you'll notice more of the mirroring activity because it's not being drowned out by your own body. So as I said, at first it was sort of advertised as if it was simple, but actually it turns out it's very complex, and there's inhibitory mechanisms, there's suppression of mirror neuron activity. So it's context dependent, it's complex, it's not that simple, but it is a phenomenon that exists. Kinesthetic empathy is a thing where we feel other bodies, right? And evolutionarily it makes sense. It's a useful adaptation for a social creature. So then, if we put these together, body maps, mirror neurons, and neuroplasticity, if you have well-developed maps of particular parts of your body, you will experience more kinesthetic empathy for those parts. If you are a weightlifter who does lots of loaded barbell squats, when you watch someone else doing barbell squats, the complexity and detailed firing of the hip and butt, like the lower, throughout your legs and every part involved in the squat, will be much more detailed than someone who's never done a loaded barbell squat, right? A dancer, so kinesthetic empathy, there's lots written about it within the dance world, because it's been understood in the dance world since before anyone knew about mirror neurons, where, and now with the studies and the EEGs and so on, and fMRI and what have you, when a dancer watches the performance of another dancer, there is much more activity going on in their motor cortex and somatosensory cortex as if they're doing it. They're feeling it as if they're doing it, than a non-dancer. The non-dancer watches the same performance as an observer and goes, yeah, that's cool. the dancer watches the dance performance and feels as if they're doing it. Everyone here probably is aware of this, where when you watch people doing the thing that you do, whether it's wrestling or yoga or tai chi or whatever it might be, when you watch someone else doing the thing you're doing, you're feeling heaps of stuff in your own body. Whereas when my mum watches it, she might say, that's nice. You know? So it's a different form of appreciation, and it's something that can be developed because of neuroplasticity. This is the cool thing. Another interesting thing with the mirror neurons and the empathy is, remember yesterday I talked about the insular cortex, like the deeper area buried underneath where it has the body maps of the insides of the body, the organs and so on. So those body maps are plastic as well. There are lots of people who can't feel their heartbeat at will. Like when I first was doing Vipassana meditation and I first really clearly felt my heartbeat while sitting still. It's different to when you feel your heartbeat after hard exercise, when you're sitting still and you feel, whoa, I've got this huge ball of muscle doing really strong contractions, pumping liters of liquid throughout my body, and it's pulsing all the time, and I've never felt that before. It was like, whoa. And then after a while it becomes normal, and you can just drop your awareness inside and feel that stuff, and then bring your awareness back outside. But that's a skill that can be learned. Some people have it naturally, some people have it too much, and they experience greater anxiety and so on because they feel their heart beating and so on. But all of us can develop it through practice. What are the practices? Just observe. Use movements maybe to open up awareness, but then just observe the internal movements which are happening below the surface all the time. And that's all in the insular cortex. Now the insular cortex is also jam-packed full of mirror neurons. And this is the location of a different kind of empathy. It's still kinesthetic, but it's not the empathy to do with feeling other people's movements as if they're your own. It's the kind of empathy that has to do with feeling other people's breathing patterns, feeling changes in other people's blood pressure, noticing other people's emotional state, right? So again, interesting research. The classic example I use is the dancer watching the dance performance feels that much more in their own body than a non-dancer. But the mindfulness meditator shows much more emotional empathy than the dancer. The mindfulness meditator shows much less empathy for the movements, unless they're also a dancer, but much more empathy for the emotion. And by empathy, I don't mean sympathy or anything conceptual, I mean feeling in your own body the changing emotional state of another person, based on this huge amount of non-verbal information that we're all getting all the time.
So does that mean if somebody like the mindfulness meditator who's highly cultivated that, and I see you get, and I can see that your breathing pattern's changing because you're getting anxious, does that mean that I can just feel, or will that make me anxious as well?
It'll make you anxious. Yeah.
So that will change my internal stuff as well.
Yeah. So that's another interesting aside where you go, okay, all of these traditions which massively cultivate mindfulness and internal awareness, they always have specific practices for cultivating joy, pleasantness, and compassion.
Like the DJ thing.
Specifically compassion. Because otherwise you're making yourself more and more sensitive to other stuff. And if you don't have a circuit that responds to that with compassion, you're gonna have bad time. Bad time. Yeah. So again, more empathy research which shows that yes, people who feel their heart rate more clearly, they show and self-report much higher rates of emotional empathy and much higher rates than average of anxiety and depression. Right? It turns out that the right-sided insula is more sophisticated and more devoted to detailed maps of the inside of the body, but also the right brain is generally right brain activity is generally associated with what they call negative affect, meaning negative mood, pain, depression, just a negative colouring on things. So with the neuro studies of like the Tibetan meditators who have done 30,000 hours of compassion practice, one of the main things that they've discovered when they go, okay, I'm just sitting, and then they say, okay, now I'm shifting into compassion state, and they have a really massively strong, what they call a left shift, where activity shifts to the left side of the brain, which is more associated with positive affect. Yogically, this is really interesting, right, with the whole Ida Pingala Nadi. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of that, but it's super interesting correlations. So, developing internal body awareness can be depressing. So it's good to cultivate positive reactions to what you're feeling. You feel stuff and you witness it and you go, yeah, but I can be compassionate and kind towards that. Witness it with kindness, witness it with kindness. And it becomes a reflex circuit. So every time you feel angry, you go, hey, I'm angry. And you go, yeah, but you're just a little guy. I'm going to look at you with kindness, little Simon. You know? So it becomes a healthy circuit.
That relates to the neurons that fire together, wire together, right?
Neurons that fire together, wire together, exactly. So you can set up a reflex circuit.
I guess that's the other thing about spending time around people that, feeling.
Feel good.
Yeah.
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 And that's the whole thing as well. Like,
Yeah.
if you're better at that, you pick up more of the people that aren't like that. So you go towards people that
Right.
maybe.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So if we develop how we select maps, and so we can sometimes feel more of someone else's processes than themselves. Is that potentially what happens?
Potentially, there's no reason why that wouldn't be the case. I'd say that's very likely to be the case. Like
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
My old man, he gets stressed out sometimes.
Yeah.
Badly,
Yeah.
but he doesn't notice it.
Yeah.
And it affects me like crazy, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
It's not that they don't feel it, it's that everything is conscious.
not conscious. Yeah.
What do you mean?
Your own maps and they have their maps.
Yeah. So that's important thing to realise is that it's not true. It's not factual. It's a representation. Just like what I think I feel happening in my hand isn't what's really happening in my hand. It's the best representation my brain can give me. So what I feel like I'm feeling from you might be utterly wrong, but it's still a feeling. You know what I mean? So you can trust your feelings, but also not trust them. You can feel them and use them because they're useful. They've evolved to be useful, but you shouldn't necessarily trust them as being factual. Yeah? So, then the cool thing, to lead on to today's topic, the cool thing with humans is that humans are so ridiculously empathic that we can feel or imagine the feeling of being a dog.
Yeah.
These body maps are so plastic, so stretchable, that you can feel your hands become giant, or you can feel your body become enormously fat, or you can look at a cartoon, like we said, and feel empathy for the cartoon. You see a cartoon breakdancing, and you can, if you're a breakdancer, you'll be like feeling that in your body as if you're that cartoon guy. And so it's especially easy with, for example, four-legged vertebrates, because they have a face, they have a spine, they have a rib cage, they have a pelvis, they have a shoulder girdle, they have a humerus, radius, ulna, a wrist, a palm, fingers. They've got all the same skeletal structure as us. They've got the same muscles as us. They've got the same organs. They've got everything the same as us, just different sizes and shapes. And so we can really, really, really easily put ourselves in their bodies. Now, traditional I struggle, I don't know what word to use these days. I was going to say traditional societies. You could say hunter-gatherer societies or ancient societies, but then you go, well, like, what about Indigenous Australians 100 years ago? They're not an ancient society, they're like a modern society. So whatever, people who still lived on the land, especially cultures which didn't practice much or any domestication, so they still lived with daily access to the wild. As far as I can work out, all of them practiced animal mimicry in their dance and in their ritual. And so you get masks, you get costumes and so on, but also specifically you get movements of the creatures in the local environment. Yeah? So, firstly, if you've got a big blank area in the middle of your back, like most of us do in our society, us not necessarily meaning us here, but us in Australia, if you've got a big blank area in the whole middle of your back and your body maps there are very poorly developed because you've never needed to practice any isolations, or you've often never needed to even do back extension or whatever, then when you see the movements of other creatures which have a back, you're not going to feel particularly much. You might think, that's nice. You know, a lot of people might not even see other creatures with a back. You know, you might see a couple of domesticated animals here and there, but you're not going to see a whole world full of backs. Infinite variety, infinite variations on the same structure, a vertebral column. Whereas if you're in the wild, you're going to see lizards, monkeys, dogs, you know, hyenas, cats, sloths, kangaroos, snakes, like fish, all of these things, and you'll see the same pattern repeating but with slight variation. And if you have well-developed maps of your spine, then when you see them, you'll feel their movements happening in your body more than you would if you don't have developed spinal maps. Yeah? Are you still with me?
Yeah.
And so then you go, well, look, they all practice animal mimicry. Well, that's going to increase the amount of empathy, right? Just like the dancer watching the dance performance. Like if they've done, especially if they practice the same style of dance. You know, if I watch someone doing xingyi and they're practicing from the same lineage that I've learned with, and then I watch their movements, I feel it because I've practiced those movements thousands of times. Right? But if I see someone from a slightly different lineage, I go, oh, that's cool, and I feel lots, but I see, they're doing something different, and it's like, okay, I can sort of imagine it, but I haven't practiced it thousands of times, so I don't feel it as well. So animal mimicry, if you practice the movements of the animals, of the creatures living in your local environment, then as you walk around your local environment, your body is giving you loads more information about all the creatures there than if you hadn't practiced their movements. So I think this is really interesting, again, going, but what's the point? You know, we've been trained in Western culture to look at other cultures' practices as being sort of exotic or superstitious or just primitive in these sorts of ways. And you go, no, it's highly functional. It's highly functional. Like if you're a hunter and you're hunting a creature and you understand what its movements mean, and you feel in your own body its social context. You feel if it's feeling safe, or if it's feeling threatened, or if it's near water, or if it's near a food source, or if there's other predators in the area, or if it's mating season, or all of these things. So everything that you feel from this one creature tells you, so you're feeling your own environment, and then what you feel from that creature, you're now feeling its environment as well. So it's highly functional, which is pretty cool. So then for us, and this is why we don't do it anymore, it's not functional, right? It's not functional. We don't, like, you know, I see a bird, I'm not gonna eat it. You know? I see a domesticated dog, I'm not gonna eat that dog. And I'm not necessarily that, you know, we all notice dogs because they tell us, you know, okay, they tell us about their owners, they tell us about the other dogs. We still get a little bit of interesting information from domesticated dogs and stuff. But you can see why it's been lost from our society is because it hasn't been functional for the last couple of thousand years.
Do you think that's the only reason, or just because
it's a feedback loop. You know, we build walls and live within walls, we're less exposed to the wild, so we're much less likely to mimic the wild, and also the wild has much less influence on us, so we don't need to worry about it so much anymore. So it's like we don't need to worry about it, so we worry about it less, and then we build better walls, and we worry about it even less. You know, so it's been a feedback loop that's been going on for a while.
So we just mimic walls.
Yeah, we mimic. No, we do. We literally do. That's the crazy thing. That's the crazy thing. We mimic walls and staircases and stuff like that.
Straight lines and angles
Straight
and
lines
90
and
degrees
right
and
angles, exactly.
no movements like we were doing today, which are all not that.
Yeah. And so, like yoga, for example, I'm a yoga practitioner from a long time, and you look at yoga and you go, wow, yoga is a highly civilized practice. Especially modern yoga. Ancient yoga was probably very different in the forest traditions, but modern yoga is highly civilized. We're doing straight up and down, pure, beautiful right angle geometry, triangles, 90-degree things. So I think it's super cool. This whole ancestral thing that I'm presenting, lots of people think that I think we should start mimicking animals and be dirty all the time and only celebrate our lizard and fishy heritage and stuff. No. The point is to look back at our past and have this massive appreciation for it, and then see on top the uniquely human stuff. Isolated movements, you know, like linear, good geometry, storytelling, you know, mathematics, all of this stuff, and go, yeah, that's amazing, and that's the part that's unique to us. Whereas, you know, this stuff, going like, wow, this is amazing, making eye contact, like mimicking each other's body language, you know, so celebrating all the stuff that is not unique to humans, right?
So Indian temples with their sacred architecture and structure built in to mimic the structure of the body and the spiritual journey. I guess there'd be a more conscious mimicry going on,
Right.
in terms of walls and rooms and
Yeah.
the structure of the temple.
Yep.
we don't have that in our culture anymore, though. Like, our buildings are sacred architecture. They construct with that kind of principle.
Still, but
Ours today are just like
you could still possibly map certain kinds of effect from modern architecture.
There's a guy who did research on African villages and they're fractal. There's a
Right.
TED talk.
Yeah.
And so the villages are fractal and the buildings are fractal and it's,
So
really interesting.
So what I take out of this is you know, with the whole animal mimicry and all of these cultures that practice animal mimicry, China's a really cool example because China is a highly civilized, you know, culture like that's had a continuous civilization for like thousands of years. But interestingly, for whatever reasons, their writing system is still pictographs. It's still combinations of representations of natural phenomena, a river and the sun, a tree and a person next to the tree. You know what I mean? And Chinese culture, you still have animal stuff. In Chinese physical culture, it's full of animal stuff. Heaps of animal stuff, and not just animal stuff, but sky and water, mountain, lake, you know, where you, like these sort of archetypal natural forms, and you practice the shape, but also you cultivate the feeling, where the feeling of fire is different to the feeling of water, or the feeling of wind is different to the feeling of mountain. And this, so all of this, and the fact that you get all of these cultures which are still like really full of animal mimicry, they tend to be sort of what we call shamanic, with where in their mythology and in their art there's lots of shape changing going on. A person who can become a crow, or a man with the head of a bull, or, you know, etc, etc, etc. So what that says to me, my conclusion that I, you know, what I feel, how I feel about it these days, is that humans are the ultimate empath. We can imagine what it's like to be a tree. We can imagine when we look at a tree, you know, you can imagine being the tree and being there day after day, watching the sun come up, sun go down, feeling the moisture in the air, feeling the breeze, you know, blowing us and stuff. We can do that. No other creature can do that. So we have this ability to radically shift our self states, and most of us, all of us, usually, and especially in our current culture, we have learned to become particularly attached to one or just a few self states. You know, you've got needy me and powerful me, or, you know what I mean, like teacher Simon versus, I don't know, yeah, goofy something else Simon. You know what I mean? Or like we all know, like you go home to your parents, to your family, and you become the person you were when you still lived with your mum and dad. And you hate it, but it's still this thing. So we've become attached to particular self patterns which serve particular functions within different areas of society. Yeah? And we think that we're them. Whereas if you're a shaman in some other culture, like in one of my favorite art exhibitions that I've ever seen, that was called Life, Death and Magic, and it was ritual and ancestral art from pre-Buddhist Southeast Asia. And it was all hybrid figures. A snake with the head of a dog and eagle wings. All this sort of stuff. And the shaman figures and the ancestor figures all had breasts and penises and balls. They had like wings, they had fox legs and scales, and you know, the upper arms of a cat, and eagle wings, and basically as many things as they could jam into it to give the idea that the shaman figure and the ancestor figure are fluid combinations of everything. Right? So totem animals, power animals, blah 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 blah, shape changing, whatever. You go, yeah, on a neurological level, we are all shape changers. When I look at you, I become, in my brain, I become a hybrid of you and me. Because I'm feeling you, you're feeling me, you know what I mean? And then things like autism, or whatever they call it, the autism spectrum. It's heaps to do with empathy, where they're not mirroring as much. They're not hybridizing in the same way. Right? So there's a huge bell curve. Some people get it too much and they can't go outside the house because they feel too much. My Buto teacher in Dharamsala, who practices this stuff all day, every day, of like becoming other things, where you become the leaf, you become a piece of driftwood, you become your grandmother, you start, you know, shifting and having conversations with your past self and your future self, and a dog walks past and you're a worm, and the wind, and you know, really schizophrenic stuff. And when I was training with him, he was pretty much on retreat. He wouldn't leave the house because it was just too full on, too much information, you know, way too sensitive, and like, you're feeling other people's shit, and it's like, you know. So yeah, schizophrenia is another thing where you're hearing voices or whatever. There's so it's lots of this stuff is. My basic point is that it's fluid and there's not really any fixed limits to it. If you practice heaps and heaps and heaps of stuff to do with one thing, you'll get better at that one thing. If you make it everything, then you'll get better at all these other sorts of things. And the number of self-states we have, the number of possible self-states we have available to us is infinite. There's no limit.
Scientifically speaking, is it strictly a visual phenomenon?
Visual, no, not at all. It's all the senses are involved.
Just senses though? There's no electromagnetic component? What you...
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, I get the impression sometimes that I feel waves of energy coming from people.
Right. Yeah.
What's that?
So about 10 years ago, I discovered these people called heart math. Have you heard of heart math? So I was really excited because they were saying that the heart's electromagnetic field is still measurable with human instruments up to 3 meters away, and that the electromagnetic field of the heart is in training the electromagnetic field of the brain, and vice versa, feedback loops between these, but then also feedback loops between other hearts and other brains. And I was super excited and was like, oh wow, that's so cool. But in the decades since then, I haven't seen anyone reproduce their research. So I'm highly skeptical. Completely open to the possibility, highly skeptical to their claims at the moment, because it's been a while, and you'd think that other people would be reproducing it, and maybe they have. So yes, quite possible. I don't know. I really don't know. Yeah. Cool. So there we go. We got body maps. Huh? Heart math. Math, like mathematics. Yeah. I looked them up because I found out about the brain in the gut. And I was like, oh cool, that's really interesting, because in Taoist stuff you've got the upper dantian in the brain, and you've got the lower dantian in the gut, and the middle dantian in the heart. And so I looked up brain in the heart to see if there was a brain in the heart. And yeah, the heart is so in the brain, any cluster which has specific functions is called a nucleus. So the heart is nucleus. The heart is part of the brain, like they're not. The heart's full of neural tissue influencing the brain and vice versa, etc., etc. So anyway, we got body maps, we got neuroplasticity, we got kinesthetic empathy, we got animal mimicry. So we will develop more empathy and feel more from all the different animals if we develop our sensitivity to the body parts that we share with them. Spines, claws, teeth, digestive tubes, all of the different things that we share. And then why would we do that? Well, for me, the point is to take on, so again, we've started talking about re-enchantment of the body. Well, for me, this is so deep, where, and that same thing of neurons that fire together wire together, or you can get emotions or memories gunked up in your feelings of different body parts. Like every time you do your overhead press with your right arm, you think about Tony Abbott. Every time you do your left arm, you think about someone who's not Tony Abbott. And then after a while, shoulder press and Tony Abbott are associated. I don't know why. I really don't know why anyone would do that. But so for me, with this re-enchantment of the body, this practice that I've taken on is the practice of where, as I train and move and open up awareness of any part of my body, and this started happening to me before I started consciously doing it, and I was like kind of freaking out when it started happening, is I deliberately celebrate the evolutionary origins of that body part. So whenever I do spinal movements, if it's like an undulation which I share with a caterpillar, which my body, because it is a segmental segmental body part. It's a segmental body structure with bilateral symmetry, a left and a right side, a front and a back, a dorsal and a ventral surface, a mouth end and an arse end. So I share that with a caterpillar, and because it's segmented, we share the same segmented body wave. So when I practice that body wave, I can feel in that body wave hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. I can feel mammals, I can feel, you know, like bounding quadrupeds, or jumping and leaping primates, or when we do the contralateral crawl, which you get even in the walking pattern like we were doing this morning with Craig, the contralateral crawl, I can feel lizards, I can feel cats, I can feel, you know, in the side to side spinal wave, you can feel fish, and so on. And so the re-enchantment of my own spine is so huge that just feeling my spine, I get this feeling of like, this body is billions of years old. This body structure, this pattern is billions of years old, and it's a feeling. So I can increase that feeling through my practice, and I can increase it through conscious, deliberate contemplation daily as a practice itself. So that's the me wiring stuff in there. But then once it's wired in there, it gives back to me. I don't have to look for it. I see it everywhere, right? So whenever I see a dog, I feel what I have in common with the dog. Feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it. I increase that feeling by thinking about it or by paying attention to it, but I feel it without having to try because of my practice. So everyone probably gets this when they watch gorillas or chimpanzees, because they're very close relatives. The more we practice with this consciousness, the more we feel it with all sorts of other creatures. The cool thing is you don't even have to think about it. If you just do the practice, and if you get really good sensitivity to your rib cage, you'll notice other rib cages more. You'll feel them more. Whether or not you want to or care, you will, right? And you'll notice that, like, lions have rib cages, and you go, oh, check out the rib cage. And people who don't practice rib stuff will be like, who cares about the rib cage? Like, I don't care, but you'll be like, whoa, check out the ribs on that creature. You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's the point. It's like, okay, cool. We get to embody the theory of evolutionary biology. We get to feel it and embody it in ourselves. And if we're talking about mythology, which some of us have been, mythology as being the most powerful, the thing that has the most powerful effect on our lives, that we all live according to our mythology and within our mythology. And I really strongly believe that evolutionary biology, the story of evolution and co-evolution on the planet, should be or can be the central mythology of our new era. It's still early days. It's only been around for 150 years. Lots of people don't believe it, but it's this beautiful, amazing mythology. And if you can feel it in your own body, then you're walking around in this amazing myth, this really beautiful, beautiful myth, and your body resonates. You feel other bodies more, whether they're worms or, you know, eagles or whatever you like. So it's really powerful and really beautiful, and we'll do some movements now, and you know, they happen to also be really, really, really good movements, and lots of them like make you strong and agile and all of that stuff. So that's cool as well, and that makes sense for the hunter-gatherers. You go, yeah, man, check out the jaguar. I'm going to practice jaguar movements simply because I want to be more like a jaguar, right?